Why is Broadway failing, and how can we fix it? Let's discuss. Hi friends, if you're new here, my name is Katharine Quinn. I'm a 30-something living in New York City and I work on Broadway. Last year I worked on Shucked and How to Dance in Ohio. This year I am working on The Great Gatsby on Broadway, other shows TBD. As always, the YouTube fam is the first to find out, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing, and let's get into it. If you are new here, bringing new audiences to Broadway is one of my great passions, and our industry is in a bit of a growth spurt, is maybe the most generous way to put it. And it is an opportunity. We have an opportunity. Broadway could function better. Shows are closing pretty rapidly. We've got a really fast churn rate right now. There are 41 Broadway theaters. We've got about 35 shows up on Broadway right now. We've already had our first casualty of this previous season. Well, first casualty. We've had our first post-Tonys nominations casualty. As of the time of recording this video, Tonys are in a couple of weeks, and so we'll probably see some other adjustments coming over the summer. And also, I have experienced a change in my enjoyment of the Broadway experience itself, particularly since after the shutdown, but also just in the last decade or so. So there's some opportunities here and room for improvement. Because I have these conversations online about how to make the Broadway experience better, I sometimes will do polls on my Instagram, follow me at It's Katharine Quinn, and ask followers, whoever in the community, what they think. I get the most incredible answers and the most incredible inspiration, and as always, I am not here to monologue or pontificate. I'm genuinely here for a conversation, so my hope is that me sharing this info and what I learned through these surveys begins a dialogue both between us and hopefully with the broader community so that we can kind of troubleshoot what's going on here. So, also, if you're just like a casual theater goer, I would love to hear about your Broadway experience, so make sure you leave a comment down below. Every single year, the Broadway League puts out a statistics report, a demographics report of who is going to Broadway shows. And it's super thorough and super interesting. I did a deep dive video on the 22-23 report that I'll link up here. They've recently released the 23-24, and I will be doing a video unpacking their demo. But first, I'm gonna unpack my own demo. And why I think this is so interesting is the participants of the Broadway League survey are typically older, like average age 55-ish, female, used to be in the suburbs. That's less the case now. My demo is different. I'm sure that there's Venn diagram crossover. What I like to think is that the 22,000 humans-ish who follow me on Instagram represent, in my dreams, what Broadway will become. I feel like these are indicators of the future and future once on Broadway, which is why I'm so excited about this. Okay, so some demographics first. We had 480 participants. For the ease of rounding, we'll say 500 participants who did this survey. 11% of this audience is in New York City based. Now we're going to talk about age breakdown. 35% were 18 to 24, so that's the biggest swath of humans are young adults. Then 26% are 25 to 35. Then the third, which is so interesting to me, are 13 to 17-year-olds, like teenagers. Then 35 to 44-year-olds make up 13%. 45 and up is a smaller percentage. So this is definitely a younger demo, which I think is really interesting. It's 60% female, which is actually less female leaning than I was expecting. 72% of respondents had seen 5 or more Broadway shows over the course of their lives. So these are like Broadway theater goers. 58% follow more than 6 Broadway social media accounts. This feels like an untapped or underserved market. The first question that I asked was super broad. What can Broadway be doing better? And I'm so excited to unpack this. Oh, it's also probably worth noting, I work in Broadway marketing. I have a company called And That's Showbiz. I also have it linked down below. We have our own channel, more content coming there. It's super fun and super exciting. So some of this is just for me and my brain, and some of this I will absolutely be using to implement in the marketing that I'm doing in the future. And I'm sharing it with everyone because I want all Broadway marketing to, a rising tide lifts all boats. Let's all embrace other perspectives. So when asking participants what needs to be fixed, 2 things were tied. Do you want to guess what they were? I'll give you like 2 seconds so that you can type in your guesses before, and then we can see if you were right. Type your guess now. Click comment. Okay, I think we're ready now. The 2 biggest complaints are accessibility and ticket prices. Is anyone surprised? Because I'm not. Let's talk about accessibility first. Most participants voluntarily cited physical and economic accessibility as the biggest problem facing Broadway right now. Also, accessible seats are typically only in the expensive ticket ranges like the orchestra, which is deeply unfair. Folks also discussed the growing separation between Broadway versus the larger theater community, which I think is really, really interesting and true. Broadway is very unique. Most theater in the country is nonprofit. Most regional theaters are nonprofit. A lot of community theaters are nonprofit. Broadway is for-profit. It is, every single Broadway show is its own company. It is not mission-driven by nature, unlike a nonprofit, which is. So just by virtue of that fact, what is happening on Broadway is going to be different from what's happening in your regional theater, but obviously they impact one another, and having a show on Broadway is the best advertisement for a show's future licensing. And so it's all, part of the life cycle and affects itself. I wonder if where that comment is coming from is there's a lot of complaints that Broadway is basically becoming Vegasified, which is Yossified except for not fun, which is to say it's glitz and glam without the substance or the art. I don't think that's entirely true, only because we still have our Kimberly Akimbos, our Hadestown, and also it's worth noting, things can have spectacle and great art simultaneously. However, we're in a really tough time in the marketplace, in the industry, whatever you want to call it, where it's hard for shows to succeed if they already are not based on existing IP and or they have a known star. Everything else is struggling, and even things within those categories are struggling. I believe this is because people do not know what it is they're going to see on Broadway. Our marketing efforts still feel too analog for the digital world that we're in. I have said this many times before, I will say it many more times. Every Broadway show is a media company, especially up until its opening night. If we are charging our patrons $168 on average per seat, we have to let them know what that nearly $200 ticket is going towards. We have to show them what they're gonna feel, or make them fall in love with the actors and offer an emotional connection with them, or make them laugh, or show them clips from rehearsal so they'll get a vibe of the show, or. It is not enough to just have a show on Broadway. It's not enough to have a TV commercial. It's not enough to have one TV appearance. It's not enough for social media to capture what is already being captured by old school analog press, which is still important. And also, we need to we create a media company. We create a living, breathing community of fans that we're engaging with. We need to create what the show is on the internet. Eventually we'll get to pro shots and live streaming, but that day is not today, but I'm a huge advocate, and someday we're gonna get there and it's gonna be great. We are suffering from something that is very similar to what my understanding is that the film industry is currently suffering from, which is because of streaming, because of exorbitant costs, because of inflation, because of unions dutifully protecting their members, and the expenses of labor and the increased expense of literally everything else. We have giant blockbusters that can actually make it into the movie theater, and then everything else going to streaming, like everything, indies, limited series, TV series, obviously, but like films or broadcast shows. It's a tough time. The same thing is happening on Broadway in its own way, which is giant shows with giant IP and known names, and then everything else. I think where we have opportunity on Broadway is, again, we have an online marketplace where we can share with audience members what it is that they are going to experience at the theater. And also, we only have 41 theaters on Broadway. We're only ever competing against 40 other shows. Streaming options are literally limitless. Movie theaters, different story right now, but it's a new world. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life for me, and I'm feeling not so good. All this goes to say, and I've also said this before in this video up here, we have 400,000 tourists walking through Times Square every day. Our max capacity on Broadway overall is 38,000 butts in seats. All we have to do is capture 1/10 of the foot traffic already happening in Times Square in the neighborhood and get those people into seats. Right now, it's very scarcity mindset, and it is very much like, oh, we want to take their audience, and oh, that show's closing, great. Listen, if the show is closing, fine, take that audience. But this competitive vibe between shows is ridiculous to me when we're talking about less than 50 options for people to see in one of the biggest tourist destinations in the world. We should be able to do better. It's not easy, but them's the facts. So anyway, back to the survey. Also in the realm of accessibility, More advocacy. This is tricky. Before you come at me, I'm here for more accessibility and I'm here for more advocacy in terms of who can attend a Broadway show. But again, I do think it is tricky, and I say this as an autistic person. I say this as somebody for whom accessibility is incredibly important. Broadway is not mission-driven. Broadway is not a nonprofit. Broadway is commercial theater. Do I think that there should be extraordinary representation on stage? Yes. Do I need outright advocacy within shows? No. And in fact, I think that thinking that way can actually be harmful to the piece and is not a good business model. And again, I want to be really clear that I don't mean I don't want accessibility and inclusion, because I 100% do. What is it that become an issue piece? Shows do not need to be explicitly issue pieces. That's it. They can be, but I would rather see advocacy in terms of inclusivity and accessibility. I hope that my saying that is not taken out of context, but it's the internet. Someone else said, investing in Broadway is gatekept. I also have very tricky feelings about this. In order to invest on Broadway, you need to be an accredited investor, unless you're working with a shady producer who's like, don't worry about it, you don't need to be an accredited investor. You should be. An accredited investor is somebody who, the rules change slightly every year, but it's ish. You're making $300,000 a year, or you've got a net worth of $1 million. Yes, that is gatekept, but that's also for a good reason. 8 out of 10 Broadway shows do not recoup. That was the statistic pre-pandemic. I'm guessing it's higher, and I will be investigating this in a future video post-shutdown. There's a good chance if you invest in a Broadway show, you're gonna lose your money. Do I think it's awesome that you want to invest in a Broadway show? Yes, but there is a reason why that you literally have to sign paperwork that it's like, this is a high risk investment and there's a high likelihood I will lose all of my money. Okay, I just wanna be super clear. So that's actually, yes, again, here for accessibility. I do actually think it is smart that the government is like, nah, you gotta be like rich to invest in Broadway, because most of the time, you're kissing that money goodbye. More matinees. My grandma ass loves this one. Yes, please, to more matinees. I love it. I love it. Thursday matinee, we love a rogue matinee. It's great. Actually, multiple people cited we need earlier show times, and yes, please, yes, and. Several individuals volunteered that we need streaming and pro shots, which you know. I'm also a giant advocate for. Okay, let's move on to the next Broadway issue that was tied with accessibility, which is ticket prices. Folks said we need public funding, which yes, but that's not going to fix the business model of Broadway. So it's like, yes, give us tax credits. Yes, let's have some government funding, but that's not going to fix the fact that commercial theater in New York is broken. Like, the system of it, the inherent business model doesn't work. If we found a way to live stream, that might change things. So yes, public funding would be fantastic for Broadway shows. However, that doesn't fix the underlying issue. I believe that live streaming can lead to a much broader model. No, it's not gonna happen overnight. No, it's not gonna necessarily work with the first show that live streams. It's an infrastructure that's going to need to be built for live streaming and then pro shots that will lead to a broader, like, internet economy for musical theater for people across the globe, but that dream is for another day. So republic funding, yes, that's great, but we're still gonna need to fix the model. Multiple people mentioned the insane drinks prices. Wholeheartedly agree. I have been sober for 2 years, and yet my ginger ale is like $100, but literally like a double on Broadway is actually $40, so also we're getting wise to it. It's like, you know how Kronk has a shoulder angel and a shoulder devil? I have like the ghosts of Broadway current with like the justice-minded autistic Katharine, and they fight with each other sometimes. So it's like the girl who's like, protect your jobs on Broadway versus like, protect the future of the industry, and sometimes they squabble. So it's like, I understand why drink prices are exorbitant. To make money, obviously. Margins, they're good. And part of that does end up going to the show. But that's not what's going to fix the Broadway marketing model. And I feel, as a human being, that sometimes I appreciate that we're in historic venues, but we gotta renovate those bad boys. We gotta invest from the ground up. We gotta invest from the ground up. Okay. I say this all the time, but I really gotta talk to some theater owners. We gotta have some conversations, my friends. We gotta have some conversations because I love them. I love the theater owners. They're the gateway to Broadway, but also, yeah, Anyway, conversation for another time. Many people also think we need more advertising of discount programs, and I wholeheartedly agree. So many folks don't know about the TDF passport, they don't know about TDF artist pricing, they don't know necessarily the Rush Lottery standing room policies. Obviously, I'm trying to advocate here on my channel, but my little channel is not going to be like the ultimate source of truth for all things Broadway. I also have a just general belief that like the Broadway League is going to need to invest in a This is Broadway style campaign again, because people don't understand all of the shows that are on Broadway right now. They don't know how to get the affordable tickets. And like I heard Deeksha Gower, who is the current president, I don't know if that's the right title, of TDF on the radio, and she spoke so beautifully about like their incentives and programming. And so I know that she's like super busy, not only running this giant organization, but also trying to spread the word. And I'm also hopeful that I'm gonna get to have a conversation with her in the coming weeks that of course I'll share with you here. But yeah, we just need continued information that like, yes, the average Broadway ticket price is $168, and also there's a ton of ticket prices beneath that that can be accessible. You just have to know where to find them. So I'll keep spreading the word, you keep spreading the word, we'll work on it. Great, so those were the two that were tied for number one issue. Moving on to the next issue, representation. Citing a lack of body diversity and diversity in general, both on and off stage. And boy, it is definitely still an issue. And I get thrilled every single time I see a normal sized chorus person on stage, and the fact that it's still kind of like an anomaly that I have to celebrate instead of it just being like human bodies on stage is very frustrating. I love like conventionally, you know, svelte bodies as well, but like I just want to see humanity on stage. That's it. And same goes for racial diversity, gender diversity, all of it. Advertising. Okay. I think some really interesting points were made here. This is a free consult, everyone. Specify what makes Broadway special and commit to pursuing that. Okay, so in a future video, we're going to unpack like what it is that folks think makes Broadway special. The spoiler alert, it's mostly like the community, the magic, the ephemeral nature of like this one singular experience that you're having. Again, Broadway needs a campaign of like what that experience is and why it is worth $168 or a lottery ticket. Word of mouth and getting audiences back. Here I'm just gonna say, you know, like we need to continue our efforts on social media. I don't even remember if I've discussed it in this video, but for me, social media is like the base. It's a foundation. Like the show is the foundation, but in terms of marketing, it's like your first point of contact with the brand of a show is probably not in Times Square because you're probably a tourist, or I mean, like, so I avoid Times Square at all costs. The first way that I'm going to interact with the show is a 100% chance it's going to be on my phone every single time. And my ongoing relationship with a show is also on my phone. Right now, in terms of like marketing spend, social is like a tiny piece of the pie. And a big reason for that is because it is challenging to directly link a viral video to converted sales. We've done it on Gatsby. It's happened several times and it's really exciting. It definitely leads to like visibly leads to increased traffic and intent to purchase, but that is not even the point. It's great that that happens. That's not the point of social. The point of social is the continued relationship. Okay, we're on the soapbox. We don't need to step up onto the soapbox, but it's just that there is a fundamental misunderstanding and therefore missed opportunity of what social can provide Broadway. And I can only imagine what could happen if social were granted the access, responsibility, and resources that other parts of the marketing universe had in general. Several people mentioned better advertising. Someone said, I hadn't even heard about certain shows prior to clips from opening night. There's so much to be said. But TV ads are so important. They're so important. And also, posting once or twice a week on social media is insufficient for a brand. Social media moves a mile a minute. Most platforms are like, you should be posting 2 to 3 times a day, which is an insane amount of content. It is so much content. However, you like basically cannot overpost. It's very challenging to overpost, especially for a brand, and especially if you're doing content on those platforms the way that those platforms are meant to be used and interacted with. So that can help alleviate the problem of not seeing shows prior to openings. And Broadway needs to promote off-Broadway. I actually don't totally agree with this take. We're not even packing our 41 theaters. So I feel like Broadway's got to focus on Broadway, off-Broadway's got to focus on off-Broadway. I mean, like an amicable relationship between the two of them, but I feel like we don't necessarily need to do that. Two more big issues cited. The next one is the content that we are currently showcasing on Broadway. Folks said it feels that we are valuing commercialism over art. It feels like risky work closes immediately, that we are stunt casting too much, although awkwardly it works. We need more theater of the moment, meaning the pipeline needs to be, the developmental process needs to shorten, which means greater resources need to be given. We need to trust audiences with a product, lower production costs, and create fewer, we don't need as much spectacle. This is tricky, and I love this from like an artistic vantage point. However, spectacle sells. And most of the time, spectacle sells. I think that's a really interesting point. Mid-sized shows are really struggling right now, like Shucked ran for 10 months, which is a show that historically should have been successful, certainly for longer. Right now, it definitely feels like you're either a Kimberly Akimbo that's like inexpensive to run, or you're Water for Elephants and you have a $26 million capitalization. And it's like the stuff in between feels like it struggles a little bit more right now. So it's tricky. Moving on to the experience. Price is a part of this. Many people cited it's too expensive. We already talked about that. Pedicabs. Oh my gosh, the pedicabs. Our wonderful councilmen are working on it, but the pedicabs continue to plague the sound within the theater. Bathrooms and seats, we've discussed this. Accessible seating is also a part of this. So throughout this, I have cited whether or not I feel like these are the things that we really need to prioritize. I do agree that ticket prices and accessibility are huge. I think that I would add into that priority list advertising Broadway. And I don't mean like an individual show, like helping people understand what the Broadway experience is and why it's worth their ticket and why it's worth their time, so that we can move in the direction of less internal competition and more absorbing new audiences. Because what we are offering is remarkable and special, and I want to be able to share that with people. We need to share with them what that experience is and invite them in. Because again, going to see a Broadway show for the first time, if you've made it this far and you haven't seen a Broadway show before, work. This is like niche, industry. But if you do want my sort of a 101 on going to see a Broadway show, you can click this video up here. But I'm really passionate about bringing new audiences in. We have the opportunity to do so. You know, I'm not here for a monologue, I'm here for a conversation, so I will live for your comments. Please let me know what you think the biggest successes and failures within the Broadway experience are right now, what it is that you want to see in the future. Please comment down below. As always, if you like, comment, and share, that's the surest way to let the YouTube algorithm know what wonderful people to push this video out to, people just like you. I invite you to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at It's Katharine Quinn. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the comment section. Bye.